Ryan gets the first line, so it's Ryan's line.
What? Oh, wow. Okay, I get to start the show. I'm very important now. You bought it, now you broke it. So what can you do about your phone? Well, whether you fix it, recycle it, or buy a new one, someone's making a fool of you. This is the Android Police Podcast. We have a theme?
I think it's more of a general vibe.
I don't see the cue.
If you guys are listening for something, I don't hear it.
We have the highest production value.
Jules put it in the chat. It's Wednesday, November 13th. Welcome. I'm David Reddick alongside Ryan Hager. And we have a special guest today on the Android Police Podcast. A man who's written for Android Police, Lifehacker, the New York Times, and most recently Medium's 1.0, although we know Android Police was the most prestigious of all. It's Eric Ravenscraft.
Hey, everybody.
We haven't seen Eric in a long time.
I've never seen Eric on one episode recently.
Were you?
Never.
I've never seen.
Yeah. We don't even know who you are, actually. Jules just books people, and I vaguely recognize you. I thought we had a special esports bro guest this week, honestly. Since I turned on the webcam.
You do. The official diehard fan of the Atlanta Reign.
So this week, if you're on the live chat, definitely get in with some questions. Those of you who are here, some of you are joining the chat. But with that, let's get it out of the way. So ahead of Black Friday, there's a big opportunity for a lot of people to upgrade their phones, and we thought it'd be appropriate to consider one of Eric's recent pieces for 1.0, recently talking about repairability, waste, embodied emissions, and a hell of a lot more. So Eric, you wrote this piece on Medium about how the upgrade cycle of phones is basically terribly wasteful. We can't fix our phones, which makes it even worse because people have to get rid of their phones all the time. So let's talk a little bit about that, and I guess we can talk about in the context of Google, but also just smartphones generally.
Right. Well, I think I pitched this story in the context of Google because during the Pixel 4 event, Google made a big deal about how environmentally friendly their manufacturing process is. Like they use the best recycled materials, and some of the plastics in the Nest devices are all recycled or whatever. But what they fail to mention is that once you have your device, if you can't repair it, it's more likely that you are going to just toss it in the garbage. And most of the materials most of the environmental waste that's gone into making a product, most of it's already done once the product's made, which means the longer you can keep that device, the less of an environmental impact it'll have. And also the less money you'll spend, buying new devices every year or so, or every couple of years. So it doesn't really do much to reduce the environmental impact of making a phone if you still have to buy them every couple of years. And they didn't mention anything at all about keeping your phones longer or even being able to repair the ones you have, which sort of undermines their claim that they're super environmentally friendly.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think Google made some specific claims during the Pixel launch about environmental friendliness that I think really were undercut by this. They're making some Nest devices out of recycled plastic now. They're trying to aim for carbon neutral shipments. They're putting $150 million in renewable energy projects. But honestly, Google's such a huge power consumer that they have to. There's no other way for them to grow data centers without that renewable energy.
Right.
So I think the environmental message around smartphones in particular is a really tough one. And I think the only company we've seen even try to address it is Apple with their phone killing robot thing, which I forget the name of, but they're on version 2.0 of it now. It just like physically tears apart a phone into its constituent pieces for actual recycling of some kind. But I don't even know how recycled those phones get comparatively. Like I know the aluminum can be recycled, obviously, but layers like the glass, the circuit boards are pretty tough to recycle. There's not much you can do with those.
Right.
So I think it represents a pretty tough problem. And it seems to me like I'm guessing, you have some thoughts on this, Eric, but do you think this is I feel like when I think about this is a uniquely googly problem to try to solve? and it's one that they seem to not be doing much about.
I mean, I think every smartphone manufacturer has a problem with how to recycle their goods. And some of this, they like to talk about the metals and the plastics and everything, but you can't really do much to recycle lithium ion batteries. Like they're a big component of the phone. But I think Google has a history of being very, pro fiddly, I guess not really repairable because they were largely software based for most of their history. But, they've moved away from, tech heavy people, but like that's still a core audience of Google is the people who want to fix their stuff or mess with their stuff. And, it's kind of mixed messaging when they say that they're going to, have a better impact on the environment, but they're not going to talk about how to replace even the battery on your phone. Like I was expecting at the very least talk about a program to replace the battery in your phone. Ever since Batterygate, that's been a huge issue where people know that after a couple of years, your battery is just not going to work as well, which means, it's going to either shut off when it gets to 30% or, Apple started throttling their phones to prevent that from happening. So it just doesn't work as well towards the end of its life. I don't understand why here's our plan to replace your battery after 2 years isn't like the number one thing during these presentations, especially from Google. But most companies don't want to talk about what happens after 2 years of having their phone because their plan is buy another one.
Yeah, Google can't even tell you what's going to happen 3 years after you buy a phone because they stop delivering updates at that point. So battery replacement right before it dies for good only really prolongs the inevitable a little bit.
Right. And I mean, after 3 years, Google's not giving security updates, which is not ideal, but a person can still use their phone after that point. And I think someone who spends now that phones are getting up to $1,000 for really good ones, or for the Pixel 4, it's people want to be able to keep their phones longer. Like if I spend $1,000 on a laptop, no one's going to come to me later and say, "Hey, it's been a year, you're getting a new one, right?" Like I'd laugh in their face. But for a phone, for some reason, we just assume it just doesn't work anymore, and there's nothing you can do about it.
That's absolutely true. I think that's probably one of the best points I've heard made about this topic is the fact that we have other products in our lives that cost roughly as much as smartphones. We don't look at them and say after like 2 years, well, clearly this thing's a useless pile of junk. Time to get a new one.
I'm feeling personally attacked right now. I'm sorry. I've seen the laptop shelf.
Ryan is a upgrade slut. He really is. Ryan generates a lot of e-waste by selling it to other people.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend that I don't upgrade a lot too. Like I know it's a guilty pleasure or whatever. I kept my last phone for 2 years, which I'm a huge hypocrite for saying people should keep it longer than that. But like, it's not a question of whether or not I do. It's a question of whether or not anyone can.
Yeah.
Like outside of Apple, can you keep a phone longer than 2 or 3 years? I'd argue you kind of can't.
I think after 3 years, it's pretty tough to keep an Android smartphone. I mean, don't get me wrong. We always see in the comments, somebody says, well, I've had X phone for like 4 years now, and it's fine. You can still get people who comment on our posts like, I have a Nexus 6P, and it's totally fine. And I'm like, A, you're a liar. And B, I wouldn't wish that phone on my worst enemy at this point. Yeah. It's like, it's going to be too old and slow. And I think that's a fair point to bring up about discussion is, phones have moved, at least in the last 10 years, so quickly in terms of the evolution that they have become obsolete at a pace that really, pales and, like it's just far outstrips like laptops and desktop computers and home appliances, smartphones. Like Ryan tried to use, for example, last year, a T-Mobile G1. And so many things don't work. Like it doesn't support the right internet security protocols to browse the web anymore effectively. A lot of places, like because you don't have HTTPS like certificate support or something like that. It's something in that layer.
I actually did that same experiment last year around the 10-year anniversary of the G1. Yeah. So I think I wrote about it for Review Geek, which Cam works for now, by the way. You literally, I don't even think I could get it connected. Like you can't sign into a Google account.
Yeah. It was, well, no, I was able to get a test Google account to work, but yeah, it was intermittent. It didn't work all the time. I think it would sometimes fall back onto an unsecured connection, work for certain things, but like contacts wouldn't sync and a bunch of other stuff didn't work. It was weird.
Right. Like I think there was an issue in like the early Android phones where it wouldn't let you do what you can do now, where you can skip signing into a Google account to get to the home screen.
Oh yeah, I had to work around that. That was a pain.
Yeah, and that was a massive pain. Yes.
I actually had to go through 2 phones to get that to work because one of them I couldn't downgrade.
Oh yeah.
Because
I mean, some of that is just the phone was new, like they hadn't made a good operating system yet.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But
I think
so. You could change the battery. You could change the battery.
You could. Changing batteries is definitely a thing.
If it matters to the discussion, I also used the Nexus 5, which was a little more recent, and with a battery swap, that was actually a pretty decent experience, if very insecure one.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I think it goes into the kind of the larger discussion about like, at what point do we think phones, do we think we're now at the point where we do have to hold these companies responsible for like product longevity in a more meaningful way, where the product has stopped evolving so rapidly, things aren't changing as quickly as they were, 5, 6, 7 years ago? Do we now think that prices have gone up a lot? Do we think these products are mature enough now that, if you're Samsung, if you're Google, if you're Apple, if you're OnePlus, do we have to say, hey, like we're going to start like really, for us as like people who review phones, do we start saying, hey, we are going to start like evaluating your product in a significant way on the basis of how we think it's going to do in the long term, not just from a like software support standpoint, but from a like you as a company standpoint? How do you stand behind your old products? Do you stand behind them at all? I think that right now, Google, of any of the Android manufacturers, is doing the most to do that. They upgraded the original Pixels beyond the support window they initially said they would, but they are finally dying. They're going to get their last security patch in December, 3 years and small change later. But is that enough when Apple is providing, I think, 5+ years of updates to most iPhones now?
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't there a Samsung phone that the generation when they had to use Exynos powered chips on all the phones that's still getting updates?
Well, they get security updates.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it's a secure phone you can continue to use.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that any company that, like, whenever they stop giving security updates, I would interpret that as them saying this is when you need to get a new phone.
Yeah,
because Google is not going to come out and say, please keep using a 4 or 5 year old phone that we no longer support, because they're just going to have a ton of new security flaws that Google has no intention of upgrading. So that is your hard cutoff. You literally cannot keep a phone longer than that and expect to not get exploits or a bunch of malware garbage on it that Google just washes its hands of. I don't know if I think 3 years is long enough to say that this isn't going to have, a serious negative impact on the environment. This isn't going to be a serious cost to people. Like, that's saying $800 every 3 years for a phone, which is a price you would not expect for any other device that you buy. That's true.
Even a laptop, I would expect at least 5 years out of a laptop.
I would expect that from a tablet. If I spend $500 on an iPad, I want it to last 5 years or so.
Absolutely. I mean, I still know people out there using like iPad 2s, like, because they still work. They play YouTube, like they do the basic stuff you want a tablet to do. Right. So I think that's fair. So I guess for me, like figuring out, I figure out the magic number here. Is it 5 years? Do we think that's a fair amount of time for a smartphone to reasonably last? Because I think that's honestly, when you talk to people, who aren't into technology and frankly use iPhones, I see a lot of people using like 4 or 5 year iPhones and 5-year-old iPhones, and like, well, it still works. The battery doesn't last very long, but it does what I need it to do. It takes pictures, it gets calls, it does texting on iMessage, and that's what they care about. And eventually they'll get to the point where it's like, oh, it's kind of miserable, I need to upgrade now.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody at 5 years is like, I'm going to replace the battery. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are people who do that, and I don't really care about their opinions. But do we think 5 years is like a fair point? Like, should we say like 5 years should be the kind of like, I want to say gold standard, because we should always aim higher, but maybe the silverish standard that smartphone makers should be aspiring to?
I mean, I'd personally say 5 years should be a baseline in terms of just like basic security support. And I mean, that's not even hard for Google. They make 2 phones a year, just like Apple does. They could do 5 years of security support, but also I wouldn't hate it if they at least had some program that said, here's who you can pay money to replace the battery. I think Google has a partnership with iFix.
Yes.
So, they could at the very least make sure that that company knows how to replace the battery on 5-year phones and supply parts to them for 5 years. I don't think that's that much to ask.
It's
really
not. It's not. And I think what I would say about that is that they're charging so much money for these phones. They can absolutely build in the cost of supporting for 5 years.
Right.
They can do the math for this. It's not impossible. Like, they pay people money to understand these things. It's not
Right.
it's not an esoteric weird concept. And I would say the thing about the Ubreak iFix partnership, personally, living in the Bay Area, like, it's a load of crap. Like, you would be shocked how few Ubreak iFixes there are in the Bay Area. They are all in Silicon Valley, basically.
Yeah.
Nowhere else. Like, and I'm talking like the whole of Northern California. Maybe they have some in Sacramento. Let me just look right now.
Can you send your phone off to them?
I don't know if you can. And that's another thing with repairing a phone. Like, you can go to the Apple store and like get it done usually the same day for like a battery replacement. Like, if you make an appointment and go in the morning and say, I want to do a battery replacement, take it in. They'll say, all right, it'll be ready in like 5-6 hours, depending on like what the repair load is that day. And then you come back and you get your phone, and you don't have to be without it. Nobody has to send you a loaner phone that's a pain in the ass to set up, and like it's going to cause you a ton of inconvenience. It's not like a car. A phone is so personal. Like, getting a loaner phone is a horrible experience. Like, I would just be like, no, I'm just gonna, like, I would just keep a backup phone. Like, if I did not have literally a drawer full of phones, I would keep a crappy backup phone just signed into my stuff in case that happened.
Well, that's the weird thing. Okay, if you have a 2-year-old phone, like if you replaced your phone and you just kept the last one, how many people like would have several backup phones right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm not a phone reviewer. I've got at least 2 other phones that I could go use if I needed to take my Pixel 4 in, and it would suck, but I could do it for an afternoon or a week. So why can't they just last that long?
Yeah. And I think I've heard from people in our world who do that sometimes, like, who like say, like, I do have my old phone. I mean, I've seen it from commenters all the time, like, oh yeah, I do have an old phone in a drawer that's there in case I need to use it. But most people don't. And I don't think most people, like, especially if you have an iPhone, like, that situation is not tenable, because like switching between iPhones is it's a big process. Like, don't get me wrong, Apple's transfer utility works great, but like going back to an old iPhone that you used before would probably not be a very pleasant experience.
No. I think a lot of cases, the phones people would be switching back to might be, like we were talking about before, too insecure to realistically use. You don't want to hamper your privacy just because the phone you have doesn't work right now.
So I think it's safe to say that, like, the 2 big issues, Eric, that you've identified are the battery and then the software support. Like, are those really the 2 biggest things just causing people to throw away their phones?
I mean, I think that there's a few other basic repairs you can do that extend the life of your phone. Like, my last phone, the USB port was already so loose that I use it for Android Auto, and I had to like make sure it was sitting in just the right spot to not.
I know that feel.
Yeah. Like there's things that can go wrong after more than a couple years. And I don't expect Google or any company to fix those overnight. But you have a good battery replacement program and just support security updates for longer, you could have, I would guess, a bigger environmental impact, a bigger financial impact on your customers than you could ever have with whatever recycling program you have. Because making fewer phones is going to be better for the environment and better on people's wallets than any kind of improvements to the process. I think that's at least an amazing start.
Yeah. And I think that's identifying the 2 biggest reasons to help people keep their phones longer, which I think it's the same thing if you talk to people in like the auto industry, like, the number 1 thing you can do to reduce your carbon footprint when owning a car is to keep it. Exactly. Like, used cars, if you keep them a long time, like the carbon footprint goes down like logarithmically as you keep it longer and longer and longer and longer, because there's just less demand for the product. But that's so at odds with the whole smartphone business, which has been predicated on volume. Like, volume is how this business works. And when you start telling smartphone companies, you need to stop telling your consumers to upgrade so often, you're really like,
that happened with Apple, actually, because they, part of the battery gate thing was that people figured out, if I replace the battery in my iPhone, it will last longer. Apple had to start offering cheap battery replacements for like $30. And like that next year, Apple sold fewer iPhones. I think some reports were that it was like 10 million fewer iPhones.
Yep.
And then people are writing like sites that covered Batterygate were also covering Apple like sells fewer phones. Like, what's going on with Apple sales? It's like, you you caused this.
Tim
with
Cook
your
literally
reporting.
setting his hair on fire as Apple sales decline.
Yeah.
Like I definitely see the hypocrisy there. I'm sure
Yeah.
we also, I don't know if we
I
talked
mean-
about like the drop in iPhone sales, but I do remember that. Obviously it was
I
big.
mean, I'm not even saying it's
There's been
bad
a
to talk
general
about
drop
it.
in sales, just like
Yeah.
across the board,
Well, there
because
is-
of the maturity of the market.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. And we have definitely seen like, all of the analyst forecasts have shown that like
Yeah.
the smartphone market has plateaued. We
Yeah.
are at peak smartphone right now. And
Growth
from
in
here,
the
it's,
US is not like happening at the scale that it used to be. That's pretty much, that age is over.
Right.
we're
and-
in negative growth now. Like
Yeah.
smartphone sales are actually declining. So I think that's definitely an important thing to point out. And I do think in general, you are seeing people hold on the phones longer. I think that
Exactly.
is the
Yeah.
trend. Whether it's an iPhone, whether it's some other phone, I think Google is slowly doing its part to change, kind of the way we talk about like how long you keep a phone with security updates and that kind of stuff. But I think that one thing that I've really not seen a lot of companies do, and I'd love to see, is really break down what the carbon footprint of their device is. Because there's certain things like, for example, like packaging, which is just such a monstrous waste of energy. Like paper, it costs so much energy to produce paper. Paper is one of the most like carbon intensive, like everyday products we produce. Like if you talk about plastic is obviously horrible for the oceans, but plastic costs very little energy to actually produce. It's very energy low on like the resource scale. Whereas these very pretty recyclable cardboard boxes we get, those cost so much more in terms of like carbon. Like it's crazy. Everybody likes the idea because like, oh, well, it's a recyclable box. I can put it in and it's biodegradable. It's like, well, you had to waste a fuck ton of energy to make that box in the first place. Whereas if it came in a stupid like plastic blister pack, like it would have cost basically nothing, like in terms of energy.
I would love to see a blister pack phone.
Yes, the blister pack iPhone. I demand it.
Oh my God.
That would be amazing. And the other things like cables and chargers. How many of us have like just excess chargers? How many? I don't even
Oh my
want
God.
to know.
They are all over my desk right now.
I got like
honestly.
2 or 3 drawers full of power accessories.
Yeah, I don't
could
even.
show you a bin. I could drag it out. It's like this huge of cables and shit. So
Yeah, it's awful. Like cables and all that kind of stuff. Like that's copper. Like that is a valuable resource. It has to go into those cables. It's not free. It's cables are probably pretty low energy intensity. They're mostly plastic, so it's I guess it's not horrible. But it's just these little things, they add up. I applaud Google for not putting a pair of, or putting a headphone jack adapter in the box with the Pixel. I don't think that's necessary. We need to stop, acting like it's this war where the amount of shit you put in the box, like, really, really matters. I don't think that's fair. I mean, honestly, the case that like the Pixel fabric cases come in, that should be the size of the box your phone comes in. That should be it.
Yeah, there's no reason to do that.
And if you really want the extra stuff, guess what? What should happen is, okay, the phone's $900, make it $875, charge an extra $20 for a power brick and $5 for a USB cable. People would go ballistic. But if you really care about reducing waste and getting people to just not buy shit they don't need, this is an easy and effective way to do it. Probably up your margins on accessories, frankly. Like there'd be a business upside there.
Yeah. I think you kind of hit on something though, because like this is the term recyclable, and a lot of the terms you hear they're marketing terms. They want you to feel better about buying a phone and buying a bunch of accessories for it. I'm not wasting materials, but because my box is recyclable, I can feel better about myself. And to that extent, it makes sense for Google to pursue, or any manufacturer to pursue, environmentally friendly policies. But you're right; they could make massive impacts with just the tiniest. Companies can save massive amounts of money with tiny decisions when it benefits them. It's telling that they won't do the same thing when it benefits the environment or benefits their consumers. Even like, I don't need that junk in my house.
Yeah, and it's also, I think the other part of it is just, it's not just one company making a difference. Like Google as a smartphone company is not going to make a meaningful environmental impact by changing their packaging and accessory strategy around their phones. But they send a message to the rest of the industry when they do this. If Apple were to do that, everybody else would follow suit like within a year. without question. Like everybody like, great, we don't have to toss in all this other stuff that costs us a little bit of incremental money. We can make more per phone. And I feel like Apple will probably eventually go in that direction for the environment's sake. But especially with their switch to, I think when they finally switch the iPhone to USB-C, I bet it will not take them long to stop including cables with the phones anymore.
I still don't understand why they haven't done that.
Yeah, I think it's a legacy thing. It's the same reason Samsung kept a Type A USB charger for like 7 years, the same stupid one. But that's a different conversation, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I do think this is an important topic, and I think that there are a lot of great ways that manufacturers could be reducing their environmental impact, and especially in a time where we're starting to learn that like recycling is really not all it's cracked up to be in a lot of ways. And
now that we can't just send it all to China.
Yeah, where honestly it was barely being recycled at all to begin with. Like that's again a whole other can of worms. But I think it speaks to like us as consumers. The number one thing we can do to reduce our environmental impact is to stop consuming as many things. Like at the end of the day, that's the solution. And companies with smartphones really been big enablers of our worst habits. I mean, it's kind of like, in some countries, like where I know in Japan, for example, they have a road tax on cars over a certain age. So you have to buy a new car if you want to keep your road tax down. It's meant to prop up the Japanese auto industry, obviously. But it's those kinds of attitudes like where, well, you can only keep your phone for 3 years because that's how long Google updates it. Well, why do they only update it for 3 years?
Qualcomm.
Qualcomm doesn't help either. Obviously, Qualcomm has a motivation to keep that ball rolling as well. There's so many players. Supply chain obviously has to come into all this. Like, this is a discussion that could like go on for 30 episodes. I would love to hear like a deep dive of like the smartphone supply chain and who the players are and like what each player's impact is in terms of environment and like longevity advice, but probably don't really have time for this.
You sure you don't want to write for 1-0?
Oh God, I don't know if I actually have the motivation to write about those things for more than like an hour.
You just want to read those and then talk about them on the podcast.
I do. I'd love to read about other people doing.
All right,
it.
I'll talk to Damon about that. We'll get that going.
So, we'll switch gears here a little bit. We're about halfway through our episode here, and let's talk a little bit about you, Eric.
Me?
Yes, you. So, obviously, you really got, one of your, I wouldn't say big starts, one of your starts writing for us, way back.
Oh, no, that was my big start. That was, no.
Okay. And, Eric was with Android Police, what was the year you left? Was it 2015?
It's 2014. No,
13.
2013.
Oh, my God. It's been a long time. I feel old. I've been at Android Police. I'm coming up on my big decader next July. Yeah, that's fun. But Eric, you've obviously gone on to write for like a lot of cool publications now, and like so. Give us a little bit of background. Like, so you went to, I remember when you went to write for Lifehacker. And that to me was like, I was really proud to see somebody go, over to the Gawker family of sites and, tell us a little bit about
I miss calling it the Gawker family of sites.
It will always be Gawker in my heart.
I mean, it is. It's Gawker in the heart of the company itself. They can't change that.
Exactly, unless the company implodes, but which it really seems on its way to doing right now. When you started Lifehacker, like what did you learn? What were the big things? Like, what was probably like the craziest thing about starting that job?
Switching to Lifehacker was interesting because I had just written about Android for Android Police for actually not as long as I thought. By the way, I looked it up and it was like a year and a half. It's crazy to me that it wasn't several years.
It feels like ages working here.
You were really down in the Artem in the trenches AP too. That was this was a different time.
Yeah. Was it? Okay. Because I tell people that writing for Android Police is a boot camp that will prepare you for the world. I don't know if he's still on that kick, but we still have drill instructors. We just have new drill instructors now. So trust me, it still is. Okay, good. Because like it can suck working through it, but like I'll tell you, every editor I've had ever since has been like, I like you. You deliver clean copy. But I went from there to Lifehacker, and the big thing there was that I was covering everything. Lifehacker does not just cover one topic, and they don't have you stick to one topic, or at least didn't when I worked there. It's changed guards now. So like I was doing Android one week and writing about like the psychology of confidence the next week, and then over to VPNs another week or something. Actually, Whitson did most of the VPN work, mercifully. But I branched out to a whole bunch of different topics, and like that kind of gave me the foundation to move on to a variety of different sites. I briefly went over to How To Geek. I followed Whitson there. And now I'm freelancing for the New York Times, is the big client that everyone knows. I also work for Medium and 10, where I focus on tech commentary and policy and whatnot. I don't know if many people know, I also write for The Inventory about just cool products. So I'll spend one day grilling companies about like what are your privacy policies and what are your environmental policies, and then I'll go over and be like, hey, this board game's really cool. Maybe you should buy that. That's great.
Commerce.
Yeah. I mean, I'm freelance. I can't turn down work.
So 10 has been a really interesting publication to watch emerge, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, especially, when I saw they got Megan Marone from Twits, and she's running some things over there. And like some of the gets they've got are pretty big. They really got some really big people recently. Like, how's it been there? Like, what is your experience writing for them?
So I'll say this: I'm freelancing for them. A lot of the people the gets are like staffers. So I have very limited perspective, and I'm not totally sure how much I even should say about that. But because I don't speak for the company, but I will say, as a freelancer, I've seen that Medium is actually pouring a lot of resources into these companies. I'm going to sound like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but like they are hiring people and paying them well, which is something that's not happening in the rest of the industry. Like you're seeing companies laying off writers or cutting their salary or whatnot. A lot of newsrooms are unionizing, and a lot of them need to be, because they're working against, private equity bros or, just corporate overlords that don't necessarily want to pour resources into reporting. Medium, and specifically 10, is pouring a lot of resources into getting reporters who can break stories. Dave over at 10 has broken multiple stories recently about government surveillance programs. They've had stories on Amazon working with the police, with the Ring network. Like they're covering like breaking reporting stories that are, have political impacts and matter to consumers that they might not have heard about otherwise. Again, I'm sounding like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but that's what you get when you invest in reporting, when you pay your writers.
Yeah, it's been really exciting for me to watch them take off, because there really have been some great stories there, some really compelling stuff. I think we're watching kind of like a little bit of a digital media. I don't want to call it a renaissance, but there's a little bit of a reboot.
Let's not.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a reboot happening right now between Josh Topolsky's new outfit, and then Politico just launched their new tech publication too. David Pierce is editor at large over there, left the Wall Street Journal.
Protocol or something?
Yes, the Protocol. Yeah. I'll be curious to see what ends up happening there. They got some pretty big people real quick too. They poached some people from Wired, which Wired is undergoing its own renaissance too.
Right.
Wired's really had a comeback. Lauren Good's doing awesome stuff over there. There are a lot of awesome people. So I think it's, as a freelancer, I would guess it's probably a pretty exciting time to be writing about like the larger, area of consumer technology.
For a lot of venues now.
Yeah, and so, I mean, like I think people have just sort of lost their stomach for regurgitated press releases. I think we sort of had a few years around the time smartphones came out where like everybody just wanted more and more, and now it's like, can you tell me what's really going on?
Yeah, thankfully.
Absolutely. There's definitely been a shift in the tone of tech reporting overall, which, ironically was spearheaded by blogs like Gizmodo back in the day, who really seemed to relish in taking a knife to the gut of companies over certain issues, often in a way that seemed willfully vindictive, but I still enjoyed reading it. That was probably, here's a good question. So my first site that really got me into technology as like something to read about and like be involved in the discussion about was Gizmodo. Gizmodo's approach, its tone, its whole like very tongue in cheek and like, really putting feet to fire, really like that's what got me into it. What was the site that really got you into it?
I mean, I'm gonna sound like it's you guys. It's Android Police.
Aw.
Like I will say, especially at Android Police's level, and this was coming from me as an outsider before I even worked for the site. It's clear that unless you're one of the big companies, it's really hard to follow the news. And without access or whatever, Android Police did a good job of being like, no, we're going to add something to our coverage, or like do things that other people don't. The APK teardowns were a huge new thing that I think a few sites have started copying. I'm not totally sure how much Google even allows that to happen anymore. Surely they know.
Yeah, it's a little less lucrative in terms of returns than it used to be, I think. But yeah, that was a big thing for us.
Right, but that was like, this is something Google definitely doesn't want known, and we're going to report it. Gizmodo was also a huge influence for me because, their tone, I don't think it gets enough credit for how much it has impacted tech coverage, because they were very much just like, we're talking to you, the reader, about technology. Like every single one of us who writes about technology, we will go have those conversations with someone else. Someone will be like, hey, I heard a new phone came out, and we'll be like, yeah, here's what we think about it. And old media sites that cover it will often cover it in a very clinical approach, like here's the stats, here's our benchmarks or whatever. But Gizmodo was a strong influence in saying, hey, look, just no, you shouldn't get it. All right, it's not a good phone. And just saying that.
I think they really did. I like a lot of the Gawker properties, I don't think Gizmodo got enough credit for the way they shaped the world of technology reporting early on. Like Gawker itself shaped the world of investigative reporting in a lot of ways modernly. Gawker took a lot of risks. Gizmodo in product technology, nobody's going to say they were like a beacon of investigative journalism, but in the space of product journalism, where access is everything, Gizmodo did take a lot of risks. Like they pissed people off constantly.
The iPhone 4 is the peak of that. I mean, was it Jason Chen who got his door knocked down over that one? I don't, and they lost access to Apple for a long time. I think they got it back a few years later after Tim Cook took over. But you can't say they weren't willing to piss the companies off. And this was in that era where readers didn't necessarily want that. But now you want someone who's willing to say yeah, I'll cover the story that makes Mark Zuckerberg kick down my door. You want reporters who are going to do that. And Gizmodo was doing that before it became cool, I guess.
Yeah, they really were. So, speaking, going back to Android Police a little bit, so I don't honestly remember when you started. I've had so many people come and go, and it's I barely have enough functioning brain cells.
I know you barely remember
last week. Yeah,
I'm lucky he remembers me, and I work for him right now. So.
I was your college fling. I looked it up, by the way. I started in January 2012 and left in July 2013.
Yep. Did not last crazy long, but they were memorable. They were memorable months.
Yeah, they were impactful years.
Eric was what I do remember about Eric was that there was a brief overlap period when Aaron Gingrich still worked for us. And you could not have found two people who did not get along worse than Eric and Aaron. It was the most ridiculous thing. It was literally putting a cat in a bathtub full of water. It was a violent reaction. Granted, I did not get along with Aaron very well at the time either, but
you didn't get along with me very well back then either.
We argued all the time, but that's what we do. Everybody at Android Police argues. It's what makes we really steal you for your future work. So I mean, what do you if you look back, is there any thing you posted for us that you're that was the one thing where I really felt like this is what I want to do now. This is this is obviously where I want to take my career.
Well, okay. The direction I want to take my career, I'm trying to think, because I wrote a lot of stuff that I loved writing for Android Police that I don't even know if I could make my career now. I used to do
you can pick one that's a poop joke and one that's career defining.
Well, there was one. I know you said this is a sweary podcast, but it's on your website. I can say it. I wrote a review of Taint Wrangler, The game.
Oh my god.
It was because like Artem would just find bad games. Like they're not games you want to recommend to anyone. And I think the headline was something along the lines of Taint Wrangler is a bad game that will be pulled before you finish reading the story. And it was minutes after the story went up.
Yeah, it says Taint Wrangler is a gross, perverse, horrible game that will probably be pulled before you finish reading this article. The thumbnail is a blurred penis.
That's right. That's right. I had to blur it. And like I loved writing those though, because they
wow.
it was just fun to take the piss out of the dick on the store. Like those those I don't know if they did well, but they did well with our audience, the people who talked to us, because I'm guessing there was like 100 comments on that, or at least some article like that. Like I loved doing those. Those were so much fun. As far as stuff that like I actually wanted to do for my career, I wish I could do that for my career. But like I think there were some bigger articles where like I did some editorial stuff. I know in 2012 I did one of the articles that was like, it's okay if your phone isn't revolutionary. Like I was like, look, I remember I had a really pretentious section about punctuated equilibrium or something. Where it's like, look, things are going to change a lot really quickly and then not change for a while. And then they didn't. Like it's been 6-7 years since I wrote that article, and I think more changed in the 4 years leading up to it than in the 7 years since then for smartphones, because like you don't need them to change. And like I love looking at like those high level views of technology, and really any area that I ended up writing for. I do more than just technology now, but like I love taking a step back and going like, hey, let's look at what's really going on. Which I think puts me at odds sometimes with the phone review community. Once in a while.
I think that's fair to say. You're definitely. I mean, and we're in this business where like a lot of people have and I admittedly us to an extent have resigned to the fact that there is this ocean of never-ending tidal wave of products, and you just got to sit there with a bucket and like just be bailing water the whole time. And there's not a lot of time for reflection on that. Frankly, it can be hard.
Yeah,
and I think that's changed slowly a little bit, but I think that like you said, back in the day, the whole blog spam thing was really going strong, and it really was a lot of regurgitation. Today, I think we were being a little more thoughtful. But since you've been doing this, almost as long as I have, what are the biggest changes you feel like you've seen, in like the world of technology and the way people, talk about products, and like companies like, present products? Because I think there have been some pretty monumental shifts since like 2011, 2012.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, I think that especially at least since the time I was at an Android police, people are a lot more privacy conscious, even if they don't think they can do anything about it. Like, I think there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, Google's got my data. There's nothing I can do about it, but I don't like it. Whereas, especially in 2011, 2012, it was, yeah, Google, take my data. And I don't think people knew quite what Google could do, or any company could do with it. My favorite example that I use is Google Voice, when it first came out, asked for permission to analyze your voice data to transcribe voicemails rather. And people were like, yeah, sure. Like, I'm sure no one's listening to my voicemails. And I don't think too many humans were, but Google took that data and used it to build the first versions of the Google Assistant that we have today. And that wasn't like the key, but Google got a big head start in voice assistants because of, in part, that data. I don't think people like saw that far ahead back then. But now I think people are more aware of like, Google could get this data and I don't know what they can do with it, but I know they could do something with it.
Yeah, I've seen them do so many things with data. I'm not even sure that they knew what they were going to do with half the data they ended up getting.
Yeah. And like, I just recently, or a few months ago, did a piece on Stadia, where I talked to a privacy researcher who was talking about like Stadia. People talk about Google's going to kill Stadia in a year. No, they're not. Google is never going to kill Stadia. I think. I bet. I shouldn't say that. And the reason I think, though, they have a vested interest in keeping it is because you can learn a lot about how people think from how they behave in a video game. Like, there was a researcher who was talking about how in an MMO, they could tell how shy or outgoing a person was based on how close they stand to another player. And that's just the kind of data that you just don't think about when you're playing a video game. And if Google has 10,000 people who ever play their games, that's enough for a sample size. That's enough to get perform studies on how players behave and extrapolate that out to something else. And I sound conspiratorial because I don't know how they would translate whether or not you choose the shotgun versus the pistol in a game into usable data for advertisers. But I also couldn't predict how they could turn a voicemail service into an ever-present voice assistant in your home. So, I think people are more aware of how companies like Google can do things with data that they would never dream of, and they're nervous about it. They don't think they can do anything. Yeah.
Honestly, I've not heard anybody, I think, yet. Excuse me, I may not have seen articles people have written about this, but I don't think I've read anything about people and Stadia as far as privacy concerns go.
Is that how you say it?
Stadia? Is it Stadia?
I don't know. I don't actually have it.
I always forget. And maybe it's Stadia. I think it's Stadia. I've been corrected on this multiple times because people look at me like I'm having a stroke when I say it the other way.
I thought I was wrong.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So I've not read Stadia's privacy policy, but I do wonder how much insight Google can get into what people are doing with Stadia as far as how they're playing games. I think that's also probably fairly expensive data to track. You know, even just captures would be pretty pricey stuff, but it could be very valuable data to sell back to game publishers who want to understand how people are playing their games. The game publishers get a lot of data, but getting that level of data would be a step beyond.
I would actually say the opposite, because game developers have had this data for years. BioWare released stats about which path people took in Mass Effect. Do they want to play Paragon or Renegade or whatever? Game developers have been tracking data about customers for years, but game developers have a hard time with revenue. I could see the reverse happening, where a developer on Stadia says with Google, like Google could come to them and say, we'll give you X amount of data to give us this much data on we'll give us this. Google will give you this much money to get this much data on your customers, or to, perform, they'd probably frame it as a scientific study or, a market research or something. Let us have access to this kind of information about your players, and we'll pay you this. And that could be an alternative revenue stream for game developers who maybe have a hard time selling games, or, this could be an alternative to microtransactions. Google would pay for that data. It's not like they haven't.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Google as an advertiser would probably be very happy to have a lot of that data to try to sell people things.
Yeah. So
I'm curious what they can do with it other than advertising, if there's any potential privacy violations outside of.
Yeah. I mean, we should be aware that most of these big companies do market research that you don't necessarily hear about. Because they're most of them are mundane. But there's a study, I think I referenced it in this article. I should look it up while you guys talk about something else. But there's plenty of studies that game developers and big data companies do just to see how people think or how people behave. It's lucrative for them.
I'd be curious to know what other kind of information they can glean from how you play a game that could, be used in some way you don't anticipate.
Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about data that's really, really abstract for a computer. This is not stuff that easily goes into column A, column B. It's pretty there's so much data coming from a game. It's one of those interactive, computing interactions where there's so much going on because of the analog nature of control and everything. And the fact that you're responding to visual stimuli as well as other interactive stimuli in the game. So the computer has to be able to understand what's going on the screen. It has to be able to understand what you're doing with the interactive device, the controller, and it has to understand context, which is you're talking so many layers of abstraction here for a meaningful like analysis to emerge. Like that's pretty complicated stuff. I mean, that does sound like a Google scale problem to tackle. Like they have the hardware. Like the question is, can they eventually come up with some, algorithms that glean, like Ryan says, useful information from this? And I wonder, like, is that a big part of the goal of Stadia as a business? Is it to try to understand people better?
I mean, if I was feeling conspiratorial, I'd say yeah. Like probably.
I feel like they'd be charging less for it if it was like they tend to, when data is their goal, they charge a lot less for the service. So I don't know.
But it's gonna be free.
Yeah, like, well, you buy the games, don't you?
Well, okay, the platform itself is going to be free for the 1080p version next year, and you buy the game, which you'd have to buy the game anyway. So I mean, arguably, Google is kind of doing it for cheap. But I'll say it this way: I don't know if the Google planned this specifically. If they're sitting there like, I'm gonna get their data, but I will say I don't know anything Google does without keeping an eye on how much, like, what they can do with the data for it. I think Google's a data company.
Yes, they really are. So I think that's an interesting point. I've not really seen discussed about Stadia at all. And I mean, gamers, I don't know if they would particularly care, but I think that you would have a much more compelling narrative around privacy because of Google being the company involved versus a game publisher. Like you said, game publishers harvest tons of data about their players, but it's obviously all in the pursuit of product development, pretty much product development, product marketing. It's all basically, it's a closed loop, generally speaking, I assume. Whereas with Google, once your data goes inside the Google behemoth, they can squirt out like 80 different pipes, in terms of like ways it could affect your product experiences, advertisements, other products at Google that could use this information. So that's an interesting subject, and one that I would bet Google will not be willing to say much at all about.
Now, you don't read about it.
I don't think so. There's at least one piece on 10.medium.com. You can read about it, but you're right. I haven't seen many people talk about it. I'm kind of surprised because I just got done saying that the tech press has gotten more adversarial and paranoid, and yet this is such an obvious angle.
Yeah. So that, this is kind of a discussion I like to have a little bit with some people in our business, sometimes, just in person, but on our podcast is as good as any. One of the things I've really seen change, in my time doing this is the kind of the world of access journalism. Access journalism really ebbs and flows a lot. And, it's become, we've gotten to a point where in the smartphone world, access really depends how big you are, of course, as in anything in journalism. But it's also gotten to a point of like companies are really starting to fight for attention a lot more. The spotlight isn't as big, the chance to be in it is not as long, generally speaking, and consumers are less excited than ever about the things all these companies are doing. So over the years, I would say that our relationship with a lot of companies has become more adversarial. Like we get invited to a lot of stuff. We go to a lot of things. We don't get invited to everything. But, one of the things, we have to deal with, covering the topics we do, is we have to deal with access pretty much constantly. Like on a weekly basis, there's some kind of access thing I or somebody else on the team is dealing with. And so for you, going freelance, are you much more hands off, these days?
Oh, my access is gone. I mean, well, I don't want to say gone, and I don't want to say I didn't have a ton of access to begin with. Like at Android Police, I didn't review the phones directly. I occasionally got to review things or get, inside information from, NVIDIA or Google or Amazon or whoever to cover some things. And I'll get like the press releases, but I've rarely gotten review units for things in general. And I haven't heard much from Google in a while. I don't know exactly when that stopped, because I think I stopped hearing from them while I was still at How To Geek, which was before freelancing. So there's that. But it's relatively easy for me to get a company to give me their press releases or something. Occasionally I'll get some embargoes, but I just don't think the infrastructure is really designed around freelancers, because they want to work with a publication. They don't necessarily want to work with a person. I could say, like, they could say, all right, we want to, get a story in the New York Times. And then I'll be like, okay, cool. But how do you feel about the inventory or PC Mag or something? I forgot to mention I write for PC Mag. I forget I write for people. But like they want to know where their story is going, so they might not give me the same information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we've definitely seen, like, I get a sense these days that there is, there's a lot less. I think there's more. Okay, so I would say there's more glad handing the companies are doing with
Yeah.
outlets these days.
Yeah.
That's happening a lot more
Yeah.
because there's definitely a need to kind of feed the hype cycle, and providing exclusive access like raises the hype factor at a given outlet. You see a lot more. You see a lot of, like, the hand from down on high comes and touches a few special, outlets that shall be chosen, and provides them that extra layer. But I've also seen, like, with a lot of companies, like, there's been also, I think, a pretty rapid democratization of access because of influencers, which in many cases they're dealt with as a totally separate group of people. Like, they're not considered journalists per se. They're considered like creatives. And so the marketing departments at these companies are handling them. So we're seeing a lot of blurring of the lines. Like, when we went to Google's press conference for the Pixel 4, there were probably as many influencers in that audience as there were journalists. There may have been more, actually.
Right.
There were a ton of them. There were probably 100, 150 journalists, and I think there are easily that many influencers. And I think that's kind of, we're seeing that's a function of, like, I think, Eric, this is probably a topic you have feelings about, kind of the slow and quiet death of, like, the big hypey press conference. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see it being the same as it was, 5 or 6 years ago.
No, I mean, I think it's telling that at Google's Pixel 4 event, they had prolonged periods where they're just sitting on chairs talking calmly to someone about environmental stuff.
Oh, if you're talking about the last half of the show where everyone stopped paying attention and we all started working,
yeah. I will say, I do appreciate, as someone who has to cover these sometimes, I appreciate that I can watch the first half and then just sort of tune out whole sections of it while I catch up on whatever I'm writing about. Like, it's so much harder to just go from like one story to one story to another to another to another. But yeah, I think, like, I can only think of a handful of events that have anything big in them at all, and big is relative. And some of that's just because, when phones first started coming out, being able to copy and paste was a big thing. Like, that was a huge iPhone feature that got raucous applause just because it hadn't been built yet. But now, like, Google announced their new next gen assistant that you can use, like, to control your entire phone, and it got some claps, but I don't think I saw many outlets even talk about that when the Pixel 4 came out. Like, I could recall, like, if that had happened when Google Now came out, Ron would have done a big deep dive into every individual thing you could do with it. And now people just, they don't care all that much about really anything. The
opinion. People don't care about anything.
But there are a couple of good reasons for that. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about, like these features, as you yourself noted, they're getting kind of technical. All of the new assistant stuff, it's not something you can summarize as simply as, well, you can copy paste. It's really cool, but it's really cool in kind of a geeky way. And even if there is a sort of general appeal, you can't explain it succinctly to someone else. Right. So on the one hand, the people who are kind of excited about this know, like, if I choose to write a subject about something that I get excited about, usually David shoots it down because it's too technical. And but that's a serious concern because a lot of people just aren't going to care. And secondarily, we're all just so jaded now in this space that a lot of these features, we see them as ecosystem lock-in, or we see them as a privacy violation. We're not looking at them within the narrow scope that they're being presented in. There's a lot of other avenues that we consider at the same time.
Yeah. Right. I also think that, okay, I'm going to sound mean. I already said it on Twitter, but, like, I think all phone reviewers have a problem of sort of being too immersed in what they're doing. And, like, okay, I'll give you an example. I just got the Pixel 4 and I upgraded from a Pixel 2. That is not a long upgrade when people are keeping their phones an average of almost 3 years sometimes. And I'll tell you the big differences. It was Face Unlock, which I saw some reviews talk about, and it was wireless charging, which I didn't have before. And if you had a phone for 2 or 3 years ago, there's maybe a 50-50 chance you had that. I didn't see a single review of the Pixel 4 talk about it, because if you review phones, this is old hat. Everybody's had this. Every phone can do this. Every current generation phone can do it. Every last year phone could do it. But if I were to take this to someone who is upgrading from, a Galaxy S 2015, I don't know what the version was then, or even just an old Pixel. My girlfriend had a OG Pixel that she upgraded to the 3A. She might have cared whether or not she gets wireless charging, but that's not talked about because it's no longer exciting. Like it's
We're jaded. Yeah.
Yeah, you're jaded. Like that's just what it
I
is.
think that's actually a totally fair criticism. We don't we live in this bubble where we're changing phones every month, kind of. So a lot of little stuff like that we might think of when it's new, and even when it's changed and it's important, when it becomes pedestrian, which it does, we might tend to forget about it.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But I mean, you guys can tell me more. I don't know if your audience is people who are looking to upgrade from a 2 or 3 year old phone, or the people who follow reviews all the time.
I think, people who comment on articles are different group versus people who just read them, which, people who just read things probably aren't as familiar, with the way content's being discovered now, wider audiences reading about topics that they may not otherwise have really bothered to be interested in previously. So I think there is that is, a good discussion. I think that I always, for me, there's this kind of, I don't want to call it like there's like a Venn diagram of like how you review a phone. And at the extreme one end, you have a non-tech, which is 100% nuts and bolts. Like it is, let's tear it apart. Let's look at it like, as a smartphone isn't a phone. It's just a bunch of individual constituent pieces that compose it. Nothing is greater than the sum of the parts of non-tech, because the sum of the parts are all that matter.
Right.
And then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe you have like, what would be a publication that really just like glosses over like to an obscene extent, like, I don't know, Business Insider or something.
Yeah.
Where they write an 800-word article about a phone and talk like have a few canned quotes from Google executives from the presentation, a couple pictures. Oh, here's a sample photo I took in the park. Right after I got it. Here's what color it is. Reading
off the feature set as a review.
Yeah, here's like a list of bullet points that Google gave me in the reviewer's guide, and here's our monetized affiliate link. Go buy it. And then like in the center, then you have kind of like there's this other like this third dimension. There's a Z-axis where you've got like The Verge and Wired and like now Input, who are really, I would call the sexy phone review, which is really getting to these big galaxy brain topics about what is a smartphone,
the holistic experience of using the Pixel 4.
Yes, the holistic experience. How does it feel in the hand? What kind of emotions do I have to draw upon?
Words.
Yes, the feel of the hand, just stroking.
Why aren't we talking about the hand feel?
Yes, the fetishization, which I think is still very real. And I think there is a group of people who love reading that kind of thing, where they're just like, they just want to really like, the same thing. Honestly, to me, I always draw upon like the fact that like I'm a car geek and I love to read about automotive stuff. And so I read, kind of a wider spectrum of automotive stuff. And there are publications like that where it's like, it's all the sex appeal review. It's 100% about selling you the image and, like the exclusivity and the excitement, publications like, I think like a good one for that is like probably Car and Driver. Like they really do a good job at that. They take amazing photos. Their writers are outstanding. Like they're just wordsmiths. They're really good at their craft. At the other end, you have like Jalopnik, who basically writes, like it's totally like everyday language, nothing super fancy. There is like I would say a level of depth depending on who's writing it. So I think with technology, you have that kind of spectrum too. And for me, I've always struggled, recently we have actually I basically came down and I was like the, review dictator and told everybody under 2,000 words, for phone reviews, because I'm just like, you can't keep going on like this.
You told them to stop doing 4,000 plus word reviews?
I did, because those are what I wrote. And I'm like, oh my God, this is soul sucking and nobody's reading 80% of it. And you start to, Ryan is like, suppressing his anger.
I've ignored this requirement for so long. I don't care.
Don't worry. Me and Ryan still count all of your words. We're going to present a report summary at the end of the year. But so, I've struggled with this for quite a while in terms of like, how do you, how do you satisfy your readers who are there for a certain thing? And don't get me wrong, I enjoy pissing off my readers too. It's a fun game. But,
never change.
And how do you satisfy and appeal to a wider audience in a way that is authentic and that, isn't samey and also like seeks to be, I always say we need to be a good advocate for the consumer. That's what I want to be at the end of the day. I want to tell people, here's why, we say the things we say, even if I'm not going to give you the other 4,000 words that explain in excruciating detail exactly why we're of this opinion. Like, so
editorializing more.
Yeah. And that gets back to what Eric said about like, at what point do you have to start like zooming out a little bit and saying, okay, like if for a person who's, not at this, like, really into this and who is not going to take all of our assumptions for granted, how do you strike a balance? How do you tell people like, hey, like this is a review for people who really are into this stuff, but also, we want to make it accessible to people who maybe aren't as much and want to learn. And that's a harder one to strike, I think. And I think it's something that all publications struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, if I were in a position to lay down edicts, I would say I would have at least a section in any major phone review that I'm sure there's a better name, but I'm going to go with the frugal dad section. That's just, first off, like we were talking about earlier, can I replace the battery easily on this? How does it compare to a phone from 2 to 3, maybe 4 years ago instead of last year? And do you really need it? Do you need a new phone? And I know that's always going to come down to, well, it's up to you. But I think there's value in saying, no, the difference between a Pixel 2 and a Pixel 4 is huge versus no, it's not really that different. Which, by the way, it's not actually.
No.
I got the Pixel 4 because first off, I kind of like try to stay at least somewhat close to what's new for my job. I wanted to try to face unlock. I wanted to write about the radar stuff. But like, if I was just not in tech at all, I would look at the Pixel 4 and go, it's not that much different.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I need it.
Yeah.
And I think answering that would be a valuable piece of a review.
I think the publication that has nailed frugal dad, as you say, is Wirecutter. I think that, man, they have frugal dad spot on. Like I was like if I like last year I needed to buy an ironing board. Where do you think I went for that information? Straight to the Wirecutter. Like, of course I went to the Wirecutter. And I'm like, well, there's this $30 one that we think is pretty okay, but there's also this $70 sexy ironing board that will just iron like a dream. And of course I got the stupid sexy $70 ironing board. But I love the information they gave. They're like, well, because like it doesn't it doesn't get creases in it. The folding mechanism is super easy. It's super flat, big plane on it, like a big, stand for the iron, like it'll fit any of them. I'm like, okay, this is all the relevant information I need about a topic I know nothing about. I do not have a intricate knowledge of ironing boards. And so doing that with phones, which Wirecutter does as well, that to me, like it itches a part of my brain where I'm like, I've been doing this 9.5 years. You can't just compress this down to a single paragraph. I will literally go crazy if you don't talk about A, B, C, D, E, and F, and G as well, because I think those matter, capital M. And
I'll say what Wirecutter does really well with that is every one of their articles is formatted to let the reader get to what they want.
Yeah.
And that I know you guys have like the table of contents, which is so useful as a reader for reviews. I love that I can just jump to the section I care about. But like I don't think it's necessarily bad to have a bunch of information in an article, and especially if you go through the work to get that information. I just don't want to, like, not everybody needs to read all of it.
Yeah.
Different parts of your review can have different audiences. The people who are coming for the camera review are going to have a different concern than the people who are coming for the frugal dad section or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
And so that I think we're gonna wrap up the episode here in a few minutes. But I think for the final point of discussion around this, I was kind of getting to is how this is I think a open question. Going back to our earlier discussion about smartphone recyclability, sustainability, replaceability. How do you think publications can really relay that information in a condensed, readable, and actionable format to their readers in a way that also doesn't just outright say like every single company except Apple is awful about this. So you should literally just buy an iPhone if you care about sustainability, which unfortunately is kind of the state right now. But I think it could be a slightly bigger, like there could be a slightly wider spectrum than that, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, are you talking about phone reviews or outlets in general? Because those are two
phone
different
reviews.
things.
Like, how do outlets in their phone reviews discuss this topic in a way that can come into a review in a meaningful way?
I think that a lot of broad questions of environmental impact and all that are going to be for reporting outside of reviews. So I just leave it there. Like, I don't think you need to necessarily bring carbon footprints into 10 paragraphs of a review. Maybe a sentence or two, not a lot, but I would focus on repairability. iFixit does a lot of they do a teardown and repairability scores for every single phone. They talk about how easy it is to replace the battery or the USB port or the camera or whatever. I would pay attention to that information, whether or not you do your own teardowns, or I don't think it's necessary, but at least talk about that. I would have something in there saying, you're going to talk to the company to do the review anyway. Ask the company, how easy is it to replace the battery? How long should a consumer expect to keep this phone? Like, even if they say nothing, get Google on record as saying, we think customers should keep it, blah, 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 vague answer. And tell people that, like, we don't expect you to keep this phone longer than a couple of years. Here's how long Google will give security updates for it. That's probably as long as you can keep this phone. And just give people a longer view of what life will be like with this phone after the first month or so of new phone shine wears off.
Yeah. And I think that's, it can be a hard thing to really distill because there are a lot of things that can come out like 3 or 6 months after using a phone. This is something we've all encountered in our personal life. Sure. I'm sure we've recommended somebody buy a technology product, we hear from them like a year later, a few months later, like, oh, this thing's a piece of junk. It doesn't do specific thing I wanted Z, or a small minor issue Y is causing the battery life to be terrible, or and it's just like, well, I can't help you with that. I'm just providing you like perspective on choosing a product. So I think the perspective of what it's likely going to be like to live with a product, which is, I think, what we're getting at here. Like, how long and how happy are you going to be with it? In a strictly platonic sense, of course. But I think it's a hard
really
one.
Anticipate that.
Yeah. I would say, and I realize the workload this is piling on, but I would be interested in seeing year after reviews, or even just daily, like whatever phone you keep as your daily driver, review that a year later. And what was life living with it? Because I bet you'd find information about like, oh, this phone was great when it came out. Turns out it sucks to live with.
That could be there have been cases of that. Absolutely. I think that, maybe an area to start with is just like probably to look at history of software updates. How long have this company's phones generally been supported? But there are also things that can get like really nitty gritty. There's some of the stuff we do with Pixel phones. Like when we report on right now where we've just published a story like this morning, or maybe it was last night, about it was yesterday, about some Pixel 3s just dying when they get to 30% remaining battery life now. The batteries are failing. Obviously, this is definitely a hardware fault in the phone. It's not like a glitch.
That's also, I think, partly just to do with the nature. Part of what we learned with the battery gate thing was that batteries just die. And that's what happens when they get old. I don't know if I've seen that angle even hammered away that much in many reviews or news since then.
No, not really. I think the Apple situation replacing the batteries, I think that actually silenced most of the consumer critics because it's
Yeah.
actually a pretty cool thing to do. I mean, for
Yeah.
$30, like, people got a lot more life out of their
Yeah.
iPhone.
It's,
Yeah.
just,
I think that's
it's weird to find out that like your tires are going to go bad on your car. It would be weird if one company offered $30 tire replacements, so everyone just goes, now tires last forever.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's totally against, totally counterintuitive. But I think we're circling back to where we
Yeah.
began, and with that, I think we'll wrap up the show here. By the way, if you are listening to the show, you can catch us live. 4 times a week, but 3 times a week for the actual podcast. We have a Q&A on Tuesdays, podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, live on Twitch around noon PST. That's twitch.com/Android, please. You can also support the show by subscribing to the live podcast. We love it when you subscribe using Twitch Prime. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can subscribe to our show on Twitch for free, and it helps support us financially when you do that. But you don't have to pay any money. You just take Amazon's money and give it to us. So if you really want to stick it to Jeff Bezos, come subscribe to us on Twitch. We'd really enjoy that. Thanks for watching, listening to our show today. If this is your first time here, we'd also love to know what you think about our show. What do you like and what do you want us to improve? Head to bit.ly/AP podcast survey, and you can answer a survey that we put up there. It's a big help if you'd help answer it. Jules put together the survey for us, our producer, and it'll help us to figure out where we want to take the show, what things we could change, what things we could make better. Takes 10 minutes or less. All answers are completely anonymous, and that's bit.ly/AP podcast survey. You can also check the show description on your favorite podcast app for a link to that survey to be in the text description for this episode. And as always, we welcome your feedback at podcasts@androidpolice.com. And Eric, where can people find you?
You can find me at Lord Ravenscraft on Twitter, Instagram, and nowhere else. Don't add me on Facebook. I won't respond.
I have a similar policy, so sounds good to me. On Twitter, Ryan's at Ryan Hager. I'm at RDRV3. Our producer, Jules Wang, is at Point Jules, and our theme music is by Home. Next week, the Mr. Mobile, or excuse me, not next week, like 2 days from now, Michael Fisher's going to be on the podcast. So it's been a long time coming. Michael said he's wanted to be on the podcast for years. He claims to listen to it. So we hope you'll join us on Friday. That is going to be probably around noonish Friday. It depends on Michael's schedule and everything, and we'll probably be a little flexible with that. But if you check out twitch.tv/Android, please, we will definitely be promoting the ever-loving God out of this episode. So hope you all show up and subscribe. You better subscribe. We will definitely, if you have questions for Michael, we will hold him hostage and answer them for you. But if you're a Twitch Prime subscriber to us, we will answer your questions first. And I can't guarantee we'll get to non-subscriber questions. With that, thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll see you with the next on the next episode. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Bye.